Late on Saturday night, American aircraft were fueled, targets were selected, and Israel was standing by to join. The bombing campaign against Iran's energy infrastructure was hours away from becoming the most destructive single operation of this entire war. And then Donald Trump sat down, opened Truth Social, and canceled the whole thing. Not delayed it, not scaled it back, canceled it. And the reason he gave is the part that has intelligence analysts, Gulf diplomats, and Iranian officials all reading the same handful of words over and over, trying to work out whether they are true. Trump said the strike was called off because Iran and other Middle Eastern countries had asked him to hold off, because, in his phrasing, the perimeters of a deal had been agreed to. Here's the problem with that sentence. Iran has not confirmed a single word of it. If you are new to this channel, subscribe and turn the bell on, because what happened in the last 24 hours is not a peace breakthrough, and it is not a routine pause. It is something stranger than either, and understanding it correctly tells you exactly what is coming next in this war. Let us start with what was actually about to happen, because the scale of it is the only way to understand why the cancellation matters so much. On Friday, Trump sat in a cabinet meeting at Camp David alongside CIA Director John Ratcliffe. He came out of that meeting visibly frustrated with a diplomatic track that had gone nowhere for 6 weeks. Speaking to reporters, his words were that the United States would be hitting them very hard. He added that at some point Iran would say they simply could not take any more. That was not posturing. Within hours, 2 U.S. officials confirmed to CNN that fresh strikes were being prepared for the weekend. CBS News reported the specific target category, and it was the one Tehran fears above all others. Not missile launchers, not naval bases, not command bunkers, energy infrastructure, refineries, petrochemical plants, power generation facilities, the physical machinery that converts Iranian crude oil into Iranian government revenue. And U.S. Central Command had gone considerably further than planning a single night of strikes. It had prepared options and readied forces for a sustained 2-week bombardment. Think carefully about what a 2-week campaign against energy infrastructure actually means for a country in Iran's current condition. Iran's currency has collapsed to a fraction of its pre-war value. Inflation has run at levels that have effectively erased household savings across the entire middle class. The naval blockade has redirected dozens of commercial vessels away from Iranian ports, disabled ships, and boarded others. Oil exports, which briefly surged when the strait reopened in late June, have been choked off again. The Iranian state is running month to month on whatever revenue it can smuggle out. A country in that position does not lose its refineries and rebuild them next quarter. Refineries and petrochemical complexes are multi-year, multi-billion-dollar construction projects. They require foreign engineering firms, foreign equipment, and foreign capital. Sanctions make all three effectively impossible to obtain. Iran has no ally willing to invest billions of dollars into infrastructure that is actively being targeted. So the 2-week campaign was never really about degrading Iran's military. Iran's military has already been ground down across 5 months of war. It was about something much colder. It was about removing the Iranian state's ability to fund itself, and therefore its ability to keep fighting, keep paying the Revolutionary Guard, keep supplying its proxies, and keep the machinery of government running at all. That was the operation, locked, loaded, and hours out. Now here is where the story turns, and where the real reason emerges. At some point on Saturday, Trump took a phone call from Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. 4 people familiar with the call, plus a regional source, described it to CNN in the same terms. The Crown Prince raised serious concerns about the strike plans. Axios reported that he went considerably further than expressing concern and urged Trump directly to cancel the operation and return to negotiations. The Saudi press agency later issued its own careful version, saying the Crown Prince emphasized prioritizing dialogue, reducing escalation, and preventing a wider conflict. And he was not acting alone. Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, and Pakistan had all been pressing both Washington and Tehran toward the same exit. Now stop and ask the question that most coverage skipped entirely. Why would Saudi Arabia, Iran's principal regional rival, the country that has spent decades trying to contain Iranian influence, spend its political capital in Washington to stop an American attack on Iran? The answer is sitting in the water, roughly 160 kilometers from the Saudi coastline. Saudi crude, Saudi petrochemicals, Saudi refined products, and a large share of Saudi imports all move through the Strait of Hormuz. Every single day that waterway remains contested, mined, patrolled, and dangerous, Saudi Arabia bleeds money. Shipping insurance rates spike. Tankers reroute or refuse to sail. Buyers in Asia demand discounts for delivery risk. Former U.S. Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton described the Saudi position simply, saying they are economically at risk here. Riyadh does not want Iran strengthened. Riyadh wants the shipping lane open and functioning. And a 2-week bombardment of Iranian energy infrastructure guarantees precisely the opposite outcome, because Iran's inevitable response to losing its refineries would be to ensure that nobody else's oil moves through that strait either. If Iran cannot sell, Iran has every incentive to make sure Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Kuwait, and Qatar cannot sell either. That is the mechanism. Attacking Iranian energy does not isolate the damage to Iran. It converts a contained conflict into a region-wide economic catastrophe, and the Gulf monarchies would absorb an enormous share of the cost. But there is a second reading of that phone call, and it is considerably less flattering to Washington. Trita Parsi of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft offered an assessment that deserves attention. He suggested the Saudis do not have confidence that the United States has a winning military strategy. Read that again slowly, because it is not the observation of an ally worried about escalation. It is the observation of an ally worried about being dragged deeper into a campaign with no defined victory condition, hosted on their territory, absorbed by their economy, and answered by missiles aimed at their cities. And the evidence for that concern is not theoretical. 5 months into this war, Iran has been battered, decapitated at the leadership level, and stripped of much of its conventional capability, and it is still launching drones. Kuwait reported Iranian drone attacks early on Saturday morning, the very same day all of this diplomacy was unfolding. 5 months of the most intensive American air campaign in the region since 2003, and Iran can still put drones over a Gulf state on a Saturday morning. From Riyadh's perspective, that is not a war being won. That is a war being extended. So the Gulf states applied pressure. That much is confirmed by multiple independent outlets reporting from separate sources. Now we come to the claim that makes this entire story genuinely strange, and this is the part almost nobody is examining properly. Trump did not say Saudi Arabia asked him to stop. He said Iran asked him to stop. In his Truth Social post, he said the United States is locked and loaded and ready to go against the Islamic Republic of Iran, but that based on requests from Iran and other Middle Eastern countries, he had agreed to cancel the attack, subject to being able to rapidly make a deal. He then described what that deal would contain, and his description is extraordinary. In his own words, the immediate, complete, and total opening of the Hormuz Strait, plus an end to Iran's nuclear threat. He added that Israel had joined him in the pause. Everything in that description amounts to near total Iranian capitulation. The strait opened completely and immediately. The nuclear program surrendered. These are the two things Iran has spent 5 months of bombardment, blockade, and economic strangulation refusing to concede. And according to this announcement, both were agreed to, apparently within a matter of days. And Iranian state media has confirmed absolutely none of it. This is not a denial in the ordinary diplomatic sense. It is something more pointed. Iranian outlets gave no indication whatsoever that Tehran had asked for anything to be called off. They gave no indication that Iran's position on the Strait of Hormuz had shifted in any way. And several Iranian media outlets responded to Trump's announcement with open mockery and glee. Sit with that for a moment. The President of the United States announced that the broad outline of a war-ending agreement had been reached. The other party to that supposed agreement responded by laughing at him publicly. If you want the version of this war that separates confirmed fact from claimed fact, subscribe now, because this specific distinction is about to determine everything that follows. So what is actually happening here? There are only 3 honest explanations, and each one leads somewhere completely different. The first possibility is that Trump is telling the truth, and Iran has agreed privately while refusing to admit it publicly. This is not unusual in this region, and it should not be dismissed. A government that has spent 5 months telling its own population that it is resisting successfully cannot suddenly announce that it has surrendered control of the Strait of Hormuz and abandoned its nuclear program. That announcement would be politically fatal. It would have to be presented domestically as something else entirely, perhaps as a mutual arrangement, perhaps as an American concession extracted by Iranian steadfastness, perhaps not announced at all until the terms are finalized and can be spun. Under this reading, Tehran's silence is not a contradiction of Trump's claim. It is the price of the deal. The second possibility is that what Trump is describing as agreed perimeters are actually American demands, relayed through Qatari, Omani, Turkish, or Pakistani intermediaries, that Iran has never accepted in any form. This is the most common failure mode in mediated diplomacy, and it happens constantly. A message passes through 3 intermediaries. Each one softens it, reframes it, or adds context to keep the process alive. Washington hears a signal of genuine flexibility. Tehran believes it transmitted nothing of the sort. Both sides are being honest about their own understanding, and both understandings are irreconcilable. Under this reading, there is no deal at all. There is only an announcement of one. The third possibility is the most cynical, and it is the hardest of the three to dismiss entirely. Trump wanted an exit from a strike he had already begun to doubt, and the deal announcement gave him one that does not look like retreat. Consider the sequence carefully. Gulf allies apply intense pressure on Saturday. The military option carries genuine escalation risk into a region-wide war. And rather than announce a pause under Allied pressure, which reads publicly as weakness and as the United States taking orders from Riyadh, he announces a pause because the enemy has effectively capitulated, which reads as a decisive victory delivered by maximum pressure. Same decision. Completely different political framing. From the outside, these three scenarios look absolutely identical, right up until the moment one of them collapses. And here is the detail that should make everyone cautious. This is the second strike pause in under a week. Both of them rest entirely on an understanding that nobody has produced in writing and that only one of the two parties has publicly acknowledged. The announcement did not come from the Pentagon. It did not come from the State Department. It did not come from a joint statement with mediators. It came from a social media post late on a Saturday night. Now let us examine what Iran was actually saying and doing while all of this was unfolding, because Tehran's own words on Saturday do not sound remotely like a government finalizing a surrender. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi spent Saturday on the telephone with senior officials in Pakistan, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. He was not negotiating terms with them. He was warning them. In his message to Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan, Araghchi said that any hostile action by the United States or Israel, or any participation or cooperation by regional countries in such action, would be met with a decisive and proportionate response from Iran's armed forces. Read the second half of that warning again, because it is the operative part. Araghchi was telling Riyadh, Doha, Abu Dhabi, and Ankara that if American aircraft launch from their bases, refuel in their airspace, or receive any form of logistical support from their territory, Iran will treat those countries as direct participants in the attack. That is not the language of a government preparing to hand over the Strait of Hormuz. That is the language of a government assembling a coalition of frightened neighbors to constrain American freedom of action. And Iran's military command was even more explicit. Major General Ali Abdullahi, who heads Iran's wartime military command, issued a statement accusing the United States of moving at an accelerating pace to fan the flames of a full-scale regional war. He addressed Iran's neighbors directly, telling them that Washington was using their capital, their resources, and their infrastructure as a shield for American interests while strengthening Israel's war machine. He then urged Muslim countries to reconsider their cooperation and alignment with the United States. And here is the uncomfortable truth. That message worked. Whether or not Iran ever conceded a single point in any negotiation, Saudi Arabia picked up the phone to Washington and the strike did not happen. Iran achieved through diplomatic pressure on American allies what it could not achieve with drones and missiles. Now let us zoom out and look honestly at what this reveals about the strategic position of all three parties, because none of them are in the position they publicly claim. For Trump, the situation is a genuine strategic bind, and it is worth stating fairly. The military option is real and it is devastating. American air power has systematically dismantled Iranian air defenses, missile production, naval capability, and command infrastructure. But every time that power is used, the war extends rather than concludes. He has now paused twice in a single week. Each pause purchases negotiating room and burns credibility simultaneously, because a threat that keeps being withdrawn gradually stops functioning as a threat at all. His entire theory of this conflict has been that overwhelming and sustained pressure eventually produces capitulation. His own words on Friday were that at some point, Iran would say they could not take any more. 5 months in, Iran is severely damaged, economically crippled, and still putting drones over Kuwait on a Saturday morning. For Iran, the position is grim but not hopeless, and Tehran knows it. Its conventional military capability has been ground down to a fraction of what it was in February. Its economy is in freefall. Its supreme leader was killed in the opening hours of the war, and his successor has barely been seen in public since. But Iran has discovered something genuinely valuable, America's Gulf allies will perform diplomatic work on Tehran's behalf, not out of any sympathy for the Islamic Republic, but out of pure self-interest. Every Saudi phone call to Washington is an American strike that does not happen. Every Qatari and Emirati appeal for de-escalation is another day Iranian refineries keep operating. That is a form of strategic defense Iran did not have to build, did not have to pay for, and does not have to launch. For the Gulf states, the calculation is the most brutal of all three, and the least discussed. They are American allies hosting American forces on their soil, and they are the ones who physically absorb Iranian retaliation. Their ports, refineries, desalination plants, airports, and shipping lanes all sit within comfortable range of Iranian weapons. When Washington escalates, Riyadh, Doha, Abu Dhabi, and Kuwait City pay a share of the bill in damaged infrastructure, canceled flights, evacuated expatriates, and spiraling insurance costs. They want Iran contained and weakened. They do not want Iran destroyed in a manner that takes the entire regional economy down alongside it. Nobody in this story is behaving irrationally. Every actor is protecting something genuinely important to them. The problem is that those things are fundamentally incompatible with each other, and no amount of diplomacy dissolves that. There is a broader pattern here worth naming, because it has appeared repeatedly throughout military history. Air power is exceptionally good at destroying things and remarkably poor at forcing political decisions. The Allied bombing of Germany did not break German will. The bombing of North Vietnam did not produce surrender. Strategic bombing campaigns consistently deliver enormous physical destruction while failing to deliver the political outcome they were designed to produce, because governments under bombardment do not calculate the way planners assume they will. They dig in. They frame the destruction as proof of enemy cruelty. They discover that surrender is more dangerous to their survival than continued suffering. Iran's leadership has now watched 5 months of destruction and reached exactly that conclusion. The Iranian government believes that a total capitulation on Hormuz and the nuclear program is more likely to end the regime than continued war is. That is the calculation. Until that calculation changes, no amount of additional bombing produces the deal Washington wants. Which brings us to where this actually goes from here. The first question is whether Tehran publicly confirms any element of what Trump described. If Iranian officials begin acknowledging a framework over the coming days, even in vague or face-saving language, then a genuine agreement exists, and Saturday night was the turning point of the entire war. If Iran remains silent or continues mocking the announcement, then what the world watched was an American climb down dressed convincingly as a diplomatic victory, and that strike package returns to the table quickly. The second question is what happens to the pressure the Gulf states just applied. Saudi Arabia spent real diplomatic capital in Washington to stop this operation. If Iran responds by pocketing the pause and conceding nothing whatsoever, Riyadh will not spend that capital a second time. The Crown Prince cannot keep calling the president to stop attacks on a country that treats each intervention as a free victory. The third question is the one nobody in any government wants to say out loud. American embassies in Iraq, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates spent Saturday telling U.S. citizens to consider departing the region immediately or to be prepared to leave at short notice. Those warnings have not been withdrawn. The USS George H.W. Bush and its escorts remain deployed. Central Command's target list has not been deleted. Governments do not tell their citizens to evacuate because a peace deal is close. The aircraft stood down. The carriers are still on station. The targets are still selected, and the agreement that stopped the bombing is an agreement that exactly one government on Earth has confirmed exists. Now, I want to hear from you because there is genuinely no consensus among serious analysts on this one. Do you believe Iran privately agreed to open the Strait of Hormuz and end its nuclear program and is simply concealing that from its own population? Or do you believe Trump used a deal announcement as political cover for a decision that Saudi Arabia effectively made for him? Tell me exactly which one you think it is, and tell me what you expect to happen if Tehran is still silent 72 hours from now.